before. Oh, Larry, go ahead.
I also wanted to mention something that has frustrated the three of us, and it kind of, don't talk about it because of politics. But one of the things we always ask each other is how we can educate the politicians, the government, as to what we are doing for the long term of rum in this country. It's so easy for people to quote numbers to the government, and they lose touch of the reality of what we actually cherish and have already. And I don't think we've been successful in doing that. I'll give you an example. I won't mention where it is, but I'll give you an example. We've been requested, the three of us, to present Barbados rum to a very large, embassy overseas. And it just struck home immediately upon me considering that. I asked the person, what other rums are you going to have on the shelf with us? So I was told, Abbey, Foursquare. And then I stopped and I said, well, hold on, I'm not going to put my rum on a Barbados promotion for our country with a rum that is not aged in Barbados. It has no oversight in Barbados. There's no interest in bringing a premium brand to Barbados. So why should I be promoting my rum on a foreign stage with that rum next to it? So I said no. And then I got a quick reply saying, we totally understand, and we will make sure it is not on that shelf, okay? And I think this is important because if we don't educate the very government that is promoting and presenting this GI as to what makes us so special and why we should have it, then it's senseless, really. I can't imagine if a GI went ahead with what was proposed, how we, the three of us, could ever stand by it. And I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, consumer, I don't think consumer realize how little protection they have. So you can go in a store in Europe and see a bottle of Barbados rum, and there's actually nothing to tell you that is 100% Barbados rum. The GI is the mechanism by which, when you go to the EU and you say, recognize my GI, that's the mechanism by which it's then protected. I don't think consumers realize just how exposed they are, and that's because there are mechanisms for protection, but you have to take advantage of them. And so yes, the idea really would be is our dream is that you go in the store and you pick up a bottle of our rums and you see the little certifying mark, and you then know that the last hand that touched that before it arrived in that country was a Barbadian hand.
Yep. Amen. Sweden.
Yes, thank you first of all for having this session. It's very, very helpful. I'm yet another one of those guests.
Yeah.
And Ian asked before, what's our take on the GI? And there have been some very, very pertinent comments. But for me, it actually boils down to something much more long-term. You talked about the long game. It's about value and about business models. Because essentially what you're asking your government to do is to change a colonial business model into something else. And I recognize that that's a long game, but that's what I'm truly passionate about in this conversation when I live in my little house in Sweden. And I can't do much other than talk to people and proselytize and be a missionary for Barbados rum. But at the end of the day, it's really about value and the benefit of Barbados, not in 1 year or 4 years, or we're talking about 20 years and 3 generations from now. That's what is at stake here. And that's why what you're doing is so very important.
Thank you. Yeah, it is a legacy that we
Absolutely.
subtitles. Raphaël, can you translate the French English accent?
I'm trained, yeah, I would train not to have a French accent, which is hard for us. I have a question which is hard to understand. The answer will help me to understand best the way you see the GI is about the raw material you use. Because for me, importing some raw material from another place is quite weird. Without any offense, of course. But in Champagne, the grapes have to come from Champagne. For mozzarella, IG, it has to come from mozzarella, even if the name is your But what's your reason on that? Because earlier Richard said that there's no terroir for Molas, so there's another debate on that, but
For sure there's a debate.
Yeah, I'm going to be on
Maggie, come on.
20 guys side with that side. Definitely. That's a great question. I mean, it's always asked. How
Right,
do you like the GI?
so the first thing is there's actually two types of what they call basically two types of geographical indications. One is called the protected geographical indication, and one is called the protected domain of origin. And the protected domain of origin is if you might say, has the absolute link with the environment. So you cannot have a protected domain of origin with raw material coming from a different source. So a PGI you can. So if you think of Scotch whiskey, for example, you can have. And it's because with the PGI, you don't have absolute links to the GI, but you obviously have critical links to the GI. And of course, it also has to reflect the reality of the situation. If we had done a GI 30 years ago, for sure, it probably would have said Barbados GI. But because we have spent the last 20 years using molasses from the region and still making this clearly identified Barbados, it means that you do not have to write that in the GI. Having said that, you can clearly see from all three of us what our long-term goal is. And our long-term goal is to 100% use local raw material. But because right now the reality is not supported by that, we can't write it in the GI. But it is completely aligned with our philosophy. And therefore, in the future, I can see that happen.
And just to add on to that, from what I know about Scotch whiskey, I mean, they've been making Scotch whiskey under the Scotch whiskey rules and regulations and laws, their GI for many years, and a high percentage of the barley that comes into Scotland is not from Scotland. It's not from Scotland. And Swiss watches as well?
Yeah, because but in the case of the Swiss watch, what you're saying is the steel is not part of the geographical link. So yeah, I mean, and Scotland is saying, listen, the barley is not one of the geographical links. They're saying it's the wonderful Scotch water, it's the climate of aging, it's the peat with the used to be. So they're saying these other, and that's what I'm saying with the GI. The GI, as I say, is saying, listen, this factory has to be here. And there has to be enough ropes tying it down, but it doesn't have to be every single element.
And to answer to that, as a French, I'm very sensitive, obviously, to AOCs, which is effectively the ultimate GI, where everything constituting the product is coming from the region. And Larry is doing that, by the way. 100% of what is distilling is coming. Yes, I know. You can answer that. Right, next time I bring my family to so yeah, Larry is doing that. We are all doing that at a certain level, not for the Antaï-Mangué, where we have a plantation. Foursquare also is using the land around the distillery. But just to come back to that, we would have loved to use 100% of local cane, but there's not enough. And even though we try to regenerate the local industry, is difficult. So, and in any case, today the share of imported is between 70 or a bit more percent. So it's important because don't forget there's also a huge distillery on the island which is consuming a lot of molasses. So that is unbalancing, if you want, the economics here on the island. But we would love, of course, to use 100%. That's not the case, unfortunately. But we have other elements which are strong, linked to the geography, which are very strong, and that makes our rum strongly linked. So we are talking about, when you see the geography of the Caribbean, some people are saying, by the way, that Barbados is not even the Caribbean. Geographically, we are in, but just when you see the map, we are in the Atlantic. But it's just provocating. But it's true that our island is very unique. I mean, it's as you know, it's a coral reef that has been pushed out of the water. So we are not part of those volcanic islands which have a specific soil. So that impact also what we do, because our water, which is filtered naturally by the coral stone, has a characteristic as minerals and as also a pH which is very specific. So when we are saying in the GI we want the GI to use water from the aquifer, is not to be restrictive or whatever. No, it's for a reason, because it's giving attributes which are linked to the geography, to the liquid at fermentation time, notably, and after, of course. So that these kind of elements are important. We're talking about yeast. We are using local yeast. Even in our case, we have you visited yesterday, so we have also not everything, but open air fermentation. So allowing wild yeast and bacteria to have an impact on the taste. So that is a direct link with where we are. And I mean, that has been demonstrated in terms of yeast by all the winemaker in Burgundy. They are going to tell you that their village compared to the 2 kilometers village next door is very different, because and it's true, and it's been demonstrated, so that is true. And then when we are talking about the local aging, I mean, and we have all different locations, yeah, there's an impact. Evaporation rate, I mean, Maggie last year in Miami, you did a presentation on that, on the differences. Even inside the pond, you have differences of temperature or humidity, so has an impact on the liquid. So it's why we are saying that. But to come back to your question, yes, we don't use 100% of.
Larry, one second.
Yeah, I think that's a really excellent question, and it's one that I've addressed a lot too. Fortunately for me, the reason we went to making our rum from juice syrup is because we were able to see the benefit of controlling the fermentable sugars, because molasses varies in such great amount, and since we were doing very small batches, that could affect our recipe. But I wear hats in both industries, the rum industry and the sugar industry. And there's one thing about Barbados that is really remarkable, and that is it's the last English-speaking country in the Caribbean whose population still believes in sugar. And it is totally unique. And you'll still speak to people, the local Barbadian person, and he will tell you, yes, the sugar industry, we want to keep it. So we talked about the long game. The long game that I've been promoting for the last 5 years, and I've been kind of wrenching their hands to consider, is transferring sugar. Making sugar takes about 30 to 40% more energy than making syrup. Syrup embodies the entire sugarcane juice plant. So you have everything there, and it's not really in any way compromised like molasses is, which has elements in it. But I am trying to suggest in the long term that we make syrup here. We make a limited amount of sugar. But of course, Mount Gay and less so Foursquare, they have to rely on, what their rum flavor will be in the future. But I think the long game is going to be making rum from, and I might be wrong, but making rum from a limited amount of molasses mixed with syrup to increase the sugar content and still maintain the flavor profile. Studies have been made where 10 to 15% can still keep the flavor profile of the rum because of the bitterness and the impact molasses will have. You're just actually trying to upgrade the amount of sugars in it. So I think there is going to be a long-term solution to that.
Also, Raphaël hinted at it, but a tremendous amount of Barbados molasses goes to making non-Barbados rum. And in fact, if we had a mechanism which the GI could be, in which case all of the Barbados molasses was dedicated to products sold as Barbados rum, the shortfall actually would be very small and therefore very achievable to close the gap. As I say, we have an unbalanced use of our local molasses, which creates a situation which doesn't have to be, where we who all just make Barbados rum don't get as much Barbados molasses as we should. And you know, the GI could be a stepping stone. It could be a way of communicating, you know, to the powers and saying, listen, you know, you need to direct the molasses to certified versus non-certified. And so, you know, it's funny, you're sort of asking, well, why are you going to have a GI without the requirement? And actually, the GI could be the tool to securing it.
You highlighted another thing that people always hear is, if a GI, let's say the GI was green, I'm going to go back to the question which I started off with what exactly are going to be some of the rules? Because you want to know exactly what's going to be the rules and regulations in the GI. What can I do, what can't I do? I'm going to ask you to say. So, can you change? Well, if the GI was set in stone, can it change? Can you change it like in 5 years' time, 10 years' time? Can you tweak things within a GI?
Yes, so what you do with the GI, I mean, you know, it's all about how you set it up. The way we set it up is a very common way to set it up. So the GI is registered, and those elements in the registration can't really be changed. They can be corrected if you look at the state, for example. It's a mechanism. So you'd have in there your very fundamental things, you know, that you're never going to change. You know, Barbados rum has to be AJ Barbados. But then each producer, you know, if you say, well, I'm a Barbados distillery and I want to, how do I join the Barbados GI? You get a document called a code of practice. And then that's where it goes into, you know, details. Like, for example, the registration is not going to talk about, you know, can I add nutrients to my fermentation? This is really getting into the dry stuff. And so the code of practice will have all these rules dry. Yes, you can add nutrients to your fermentation. But the code of practice is then your living document. So what would happen is, you know, over the years, some different things may change, specifications, etc., and your code of practice is not, you don't have to go back to the registrar and re-register. The code of practice is a mutual document amongst the GI producers. So yes, the simple question is, you know, you set it up in a way that you can be fairly dynamic with the minor details. But even the major details, I mean, if we look at the Martinique AOC, I think it's changed about 3 times.
I was about to say, I've heard that Martinique.
Yeah. So changing the registration can be done, but it's a little more involved. You'd have to go back to the registrar, and then of course registrars would be trained to say, well, hang on a minute, you know, what is this change about? Because you know, registrar is not going to let you come in and destroy something that was created. So you wouldn't just be able to go and wipe it out, and that's a good thing.
Okay, Pete, all the way from London. Last question.
I'm actually asking on behalf of Dan Hall, who would love to be here. Common theme in chat is what will the GI mean for sheer and independent bottlers? How would they label? So I guess this is talking about a form of words. So I'm sure you're not going to stop selling Barbados rum.
That's a great point. If Shear's been
So Shear is already established warehousing in Jamaica, and Shear will probably establish. Well, they've already asked me. I don't know, but yeah. In other words, Shear. Okay, well, let's not confuse their business. So they buy a lot of bulk rum that goes into blends. That's completely unaffected. That has GI has no impact on that. So I mean, to give you a perfect example, you know, the lovely Black Top rum. That's Black Top Caribbean rum. That has nothing to do with the GI of Barbados rum or Jamaica rum. but they use Barbados and Jamaica rum, and they will be able to continue to buy Barbados and Jamaica rum. And they would not be prohibited from in their literature from saying, we buy rum that, otherwise would be compliant with the GI. In other words, we use in our blend legitimate Barbados rum. So that's the bulk of Shear's business. Those independent bottlings that you see, there are a couple of hundred bottles and a couple of hundred bottles. That's small. What Jamaica has done is put in transition provisions, and we have also put that in our code of practice. So what Jamaica did is it said, right, at the time of the GI, go and get your auditors to certify what stock you have where, and transition it. And we have something very similar. So what would happen is it would take a long time. So Barbados rum sitting in Scotland would still be called Barbados rum, but you couldn't ship a new one. So we drafted that in our division. I mean, and these things would still be fine-tuned out. So it wouldn't be an overnight scenario. But as I say, Share will continue to do for their main business, and the IB business, yeah. Share has a special relationship with its customers, and there was a kind of a myth because independent bottlers tended to bottle European age. There's this kind of myth that European bottlers wanted European age stock. There's nothing further from the truth. They basically, go to stockists like Share and say, give me a cask sample. Oh, I like that cask, I'll buy it. They don't give a shit where it was aged. They just interested, will this sell? Is this a nice product? And they bottle it. So it's really a non-issue.
A couple more questions before.
Yeah, that point of the independent bottlers is interesting, and it cut to my mind the Polish brand that we were talking about.
What solution?
Yeah, Colors of Rum, and they have a collection of Foursquare rum, and which I presume they bought from Share.
Correct.
And they all label Barbados rum.
Correct.
So in the future, if Share doesn't have a bond in Barbados, they couldn't label the bottle Barbados rum.
That's correct, yes.
So
Well, there will be a transition period, so the
Correct,
idea
after
is.
that.
So, correct, yes, so in other words, let's say we got the GI 1st of January 2022, and I shipped some 10-year-old rum to Shear, and they decided to keep it and age it some further and release it. They could release it, but it would not carry the words Barbados rum, and it would not carry, most importantly, it wouldn't carry that little certification. All that would do is, to the consumer, the consumer would now be able to distinguish, which is what we want, between a bottle of rum that was 100% aged in Barbados, bottled in Barbados, and the consumer can still decide the product would be still a perfectly level product. The product's never going to be a bad product. You can take Barbados rum and age it anywhere. It's never going to be a bad product. But the consumer will now know this is something different, and that's fine. And as long as there's a market for that, people will do that. But you, the consumer, will know the difference between, that bottle of, Foursquare rum, that bottle of Mount Gay rum, that was, as I said, the last hand that touched before it arrived in the market was a Barbadian rum. And that's the distinction we want.
I suppose as well in the future, that means independent bottlers may have to come directly.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Share is already established warehousing in Jamaica. So all that's going to happen with the independent bottlers is that when the independent bottler says to Share, I'd like a cask of Jamaican rum, instead of it coming from Liverpool, it's going to come from Jamaica.
That means, makes sense.
Makes sense, exactly. Why should
Makes too much sense.
Why should the sample come from Liverpool? It should come from Jamaica. And the independent bottler will tell Share, yes, I like that, I'll take that cask. And then the cask will leave Jamaica and go to the independent bottler.
Does that mean that if it's aging, if that same cask is aging in, say, Barbados instead of Liverpool, then most of the tax is coming back to Barbados, not going to Liverpool?
No, well, the tax is paid where it's sold.
As it's aging.
It's sold.
So,
What will happen though is that if rum leaves Barbados or Jamaica unaged, it leaves at one value. If it leaves aged, it leaves at a higher value. So it means it earns more foreign currency.
so it's more valuable to age over here.
Totally.
Yeah, that definitely makes too much sense to.
Yeah, I mean, GIs ultimately are about economic value. It's about this product must be made here, and we want all of the economic revenue of that product to accrue in this spot.
I can see if I had my little tiny company I spoke about at the start, why I'd want to take Barbados rum to my little tiny place over in England and make rum there and take all your money away from you. Yeah, no, I'm not going to do that because of the GI company.
I do think it's worth elaborating this point. So there's a couple of things in what's been said here for me. Well, not just me, these are discussions I'm having. One is, we talk about trying to help the consumer better understand what they're buying and having better decisions from that. That's a lot to do with labeling. Now, if you have a situation where there's liquid in a bottle and they don't know where that's from, that's a step backwards. That's the first thing I'd like you to maybe comment on. The second thing is are you saying in effect that you want to get to a position where you do not want to sell bulk rum, or are you saying you will always be relying on them, you just want to control the way they do things?
No, there will always be a market for bulk rum and blends. I mean, there's loads of brands out there. I mean, what could happen in the future is that, you know, someone like us, we may get big enough with our own brands that we simply don't have. I mean, that's the case with someone like Appleton and someone like Abbey. They don't sell bulk because they don't have, you know, they're big brands. You know, I built our businesses, you know, we sell and go to other brands. So, and that's a legit market. As I say, that doesn't trouble the GI. That's sold as Caribbean rum.
That's blended now, I'm talking about
yes.
a single loan.
Sorry?
It's from one distillery and it's being aged.
Oh, you mean IB?
It's an IB.
Yes. So what I'm saying is those IBs will eventually evolve to getting their tax from Barbados. So what would happen is, and this is my dream. In other words, this is the vision of the GI. Is you walk into you know, that, what's that, the lovely independent bar version of St. James's,
Barry Brothers.
Barry Brothers. So you go into, so right now you go into Barry Brothers and you see Barry Brothers Barbados rum. And it's mostly aged at Foursquare, but because of the historic connection with Shears and whatever, so it's gone in its bank. But in the future, you'll pick up this Barry Brothers Barbados rum, and it'll carry the certified mark. And it would have been bought in Barbados. So Barry Brothers would have selected a cask in Barbados. So they won't know, they'll just get the sample on a FedEx. Here's a cask, ooh, I'll take it. You've got to get someone to bottle it for them. That bottler will be in Barbados. Right.
So basically what we're saying here is aging stock in Europe, not a problem,
Well,
the thing becomes a blend.
Yes.
But if we're talking
But
about.
if you want to use those words, Barbados rum, you got to play by the rules.
And yeah, I think it's one other thing as well, is I think exactly what you're saying, which is that looking at it from the perspective from now, as opposed to the perspective in the future where we're hoping, then yes, it may look like a problem for some of the independent bottlers that are out there because they rely on the names of some of these brands to actually promote their products. But they'll still be able to get brands in the future. But the great thing about having a GI, the great thing about having a GI and it being protected, Barbados rum being protected, it means when I want to, for example, blend a rum, you know what I call it, I want to blend a rum and use Barbados rum in there, I have to get the rum from here. Instead of having the chance to actually buy it from Europe, I'm still getting that same valuable rum. It's just that it's entirely aged here. And that same independent, that same broker, blender that I bought it from, that is based in Liverpool, is now based here in Barbados. So
Yeah, but don't forget you might want to blend, and so therefore that
that's
wonderful
single,
business
that's a single
in
origin. Yeah.
is that one shop, you know, sort of one-stop shop. So, you know, they play a role today, they'll keep playing a role.
Oh yeah. We'll still have.
Because, you know, your dream is, you know, I want to create a blend of rums, and I want a Barbados, and I want a Jamaica, and I want, you know, to fill your dream, well, you know, there has to be a point where they all come together. So, and again, they are non-GI products. You know, At the minute, there's no such thing as a Caribbean rum GI, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily want it.
And yeah, that's it. That's the other thing as well. There could be still part of it then. Still have Barbados rum from Europe, but they could be mixed with Jamaica, Dominican Republic, Panama, and it could still be a brand that's using Caribbean, Central American rum.
I'm just saying that we start talking about the GI and all of that here, but we need to go back to basics. And I think it's important to remember what the main points of the GI are, so that everybody here remembers them. And coming on this, which I would like to any of you to put them in a nutshell, and I think a suggestion to you to drill that into the minds of the consumer everywhere in the world. What about starting putting a label or something in every bottle from the cheapest to the most expensive, say GI compliant or
Yes,
real
that's what would happen. In other words, when you register the GI, you'll register your mark, just like when you register
You
trade.
know, let's do it now. I mean, or real Barbados rum.
It's a work in progress. It's a
Yeah.
work in progress.
And then drill those 5 points or 6 points that define.
Yes,
the
in
GI.
other words, it's like, you see that in, Mark and the Cuban cigars. I mean, you can look up and see what it means. So yes, when you see the certification, a lot of consumers will just take it, oh, that's a badge of quality, that's fine. Some other consumers will dig in and find out exactly what it means.
Okay.
No, I think Gabriel is saying that pre-GI already sensitizing the consumer with on the back label, having the information like fully aged in Barbados, using Barbados water, using cask which are less than 700 liters, this kind of point you mean. So already, so we are preparing. Yeah.
Sorry, Raphaël, while you're on the points, can you reiterate them? Because some people still saying, what are the actual points?
Anybody got a ECS?
I was gonna say, Richard's already put it on the back.
720 litre
Yeah,
barrels.
has anyone got one hand?
Any
Yeah.
type of- What else do we need? 720 litre barrels, Barbados water.
So Barbados aquifer water,
Okay, yeah.
local yeast,
Local yeast?
yes.
Okay.
Fermentation, then the distillation, we say pot still, column still.
Still back to
Yeah,
continuous.
we put a limit on the distillation strength, just to emphasize that, it's.
So you can't go over to
not
95.
95%.
Is that can't sell vodka?
And we
Yeah, so then it's aging, so cask, we said, so the nature of the wood could be the one recognized by other GIs, like Scotch whiskey. If Scotch whiskey, for example, is using Madeira cask, it's qualifying for us.
Okay.
So recognize other GI using this kind of cask, full aging in Barbados.
100% aged. Yeah.
And bottling is optional, because we recognize also for CO2 impact or whatever that could be detrimental, it's optional. If you want to fully bottle here, that's fine.
How about minimum aging? Can we do
yeah.
an aged Barbados rum, or does it have to be
Yes.
for minimum 1 year, 3 years?
No, it's, you can have a 0 year fresh rum. But if you have an age on the bottle, is the age of the youngest element of the blend, like
No Solera.
sorry?
No Solera.
Sorry, no Solera. And we say, of course, and the other point, I was missing, no additives, so no sugars and flavoring.
No sugar, no flavoring.
So if you want to flavor your rum, there's a category, it's called spiced rum.
Okay.
And of course you can put sugar and flavor it, but it's clearly said to the consumer, so it's not misleading. It's called spiced rum.
And caramel also for the color?
Caramel?
Yeah, you can. Yeah,
It's
You can use it.
yeah, you can use it. Yeah.
Are you allowed to put caramel?
A particular
Can
type of
Can you put-
Yeah, a particular type.
Can you put caramel in white rum and give it some color?
No.
Allowed to do that?
No, it's
No.
only to adjust color.
Okay.
The way it is written.
I just figured of all the shortcuts I could do to make some money because Barbados rum is definitely.
No, so in the details with the color is only to restore the natural color of the cask, so you can't go past that. So in other words, when the rum comes out of the cask, has a certain color, you add water to it to bring it down. So the notion of color caramel is consistency, but also to bring back the true color. And then where you don't do that, you have to declare it. So if we did, for example, an unaged rum with caramel color, you'd have to write on the label with caramel color.
Right. Okay.
So the idea is when you're using the caramel color for the technical reason of consistency, just like other spirits, it's not declared. But if you're really using it to change what it is, so it's dark on aged rum, it'll be on the label with caramel color. So we think that's a good compromise. I mean, the problem with caramel color is it's an industry problem, not a rum thing.
Yeah.
As in, it's for the industry altogether to say, you know what, we're going to declare caramel color or not declare caramel color. It's very hard for one category to go in one direction than the other categories.
And
But we think we've got it, because as I say, we want to be able to use it for the technical reason, but we want to avoid anyone misusing it. So when you use it, and I'm not saying adding it to unaged rum is misusing it, but rather than it possibly be, that's where we say we got to declare it.
Okay, cool. Okay, then the last question here before we wrap up. And one other thing was that, so we'll be able to get all this information, for example, what a potential GI could look like from the website, BarbadosRumExperience.com. Yep. All the information will be on there.
To be honest, we should have put up a slide in this, but it's
Yeah,
not.
we're on slides.
It's not very onerous. List.
Yes, so just a testimony because I'm from Martinique and I'm an independent partner, really young brand, and I propose a panel of rum from different origins. So usually in my family we produce rum in Martinique, so agricole, not anymore. But when I'm doing, I have some blend from shear. And of course, where from Barbados is coming from. And I make the blend from agricole from Martinique and from aged rum from Barbados. It's an amazing blend. The thing is, next, for the future, I will not be able to do Barbados, and I totally agree with you.
No, you would be able to put it in a descriptive sense. You couldn't write Barbados rum, but there's been some EU judgments on this where you can, if you use a GI product legitimately in a component, you can state that.
The thing is, if I use rum, Martinique, I will say, but I cannot, I will say, because it's
Correct. You wouldn't be able to use
I
yes.
cannot-
You can't use the word AOC. Yes.
French West Indies.
Yes.
It's a
You have to
blend
do that.
with Barbados.
Yeah.
I put French West Indies and Barbados.
Yes.
So I totally agree with that.
Yeah. The AOC is a little more strict.
Yes, yes. So the thing is, the first thing I've done is CPU, because I wanted to get some amazing rum from Barbados. The response, I already work with Shear, so you said you have to go back to Shear. So that's what I did. But the thing is, I want to have some from the origin, from Barbados. So how can I do that? Because I'm an independent broker. And
But don't
I want
forget-
to offer a panel of rum.
But don't forget, we ship aged rum to Shear. In other words, it
Yeah.
comes from us aged.
Shear doesn't age rums. They
Well, they
send
age-
it to
they
their
do age
partners.
some.
No, they send it to their partners to age.
Oh, yes, you mean
Yes,
they
they'll
run,
age
yes.
themselves
So
to-
in other words, if you buy, for example, a 5-year rum from Shear, that's 5 years in Barbados. That left me as 5 years old.
Yes.
Can I put Barbados in the future on it?
Yes, you would be able to, as I say, you wouldn't be, you have to be careful how you write it. In other words, because you as long as the consumer doesn't think this is a bottle of Barbados rum, it's not a problem. So if you write sort of on your label, a blend of, yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's like a trademark. It's one of those things where I can't tell you violated it until I see, and it's all about, have you misled or have you done something deceptive?
Richard, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Can I dream? Can I dream that you stop selling public and that you value
Yes, of
all what
course.
you're doing?
This is my dream.
Okay. We have a dream.
Well, unless it's bulk and it's the
Yeah, I
thing is
mean,
here.
we, as you know, we have our own brands. We have our partner brand in Rum Ambassador, and then of course we have both. So one of the things we want to do is to grow our brands and our partner brands to the point that, in other words, 25 years ago, my dream is that everything we made would go in a barrel. Well, within reason, we have local white rum and Falernum and things like this. now, you know, we have a very high percentage that goes into barrel, 90%. And my second dream is that everything we make is bottled at Foursquare. So we are on our way to that. But these things take time.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's lots of things we could be discussing, and there's lots of little nuances in the different parts of the
But then
conversation.
you always, whatever you do, you always have some little, sorry, you always have some little idiosyncrasy. I mean, you get, for example, Black Thought, you know, my good friend Sukinda, and then you have Equiano, and my good friend Ian. I mean, there's always going to be some little quirk. Oh yes, I have to keep selling bulk to Ian, I have to still keep selling bulk. You never get 100% what you do, because you always have to look after some old friend.
Although you're not selling us bulk, you're just blending it yourself. We're selling it to you.
Yes, well, Equiano is bottled at is another like River Club. But I'm just saying, you know, there's always some little legacy. It's an old business with old relationships.
I mean, but just the main thing that's come out of this conversation in regards to the independent bottlers, before we finish, that would be an amazing dream to see someone like a Seale, who have been an important part of the rum business. They've cash flowed a lot of companies by them buying bulk from different distilleries around the world, and giving various independent bottlers the chance, because not everyone has a private sitting in front of Raphaël, Larry, or Richard to buy rum directly.
A bulk Barbados rum or a bulk Jamaica rum that goes in a Caribbean rum
Goes in the Caribbean blend.
is, you know, it's not an issue at all.
Yeah, it's not an issue.
It's not a threat to your GI, nothing.
I need to wrap this up because the video is about to run out, and people, I know they want to eat and have drinks and everything, but I want to really thank you guys at the bottom of my heart for actually being. Amazing, great questions, and yeah, it starts here. This is the first ever in the history of the world Barbados rum experience.